I got invited to dinner one time by a friend, and he said, "Hey, I got this friend from Yemen. I want you to meet him." And I was like, "Awesome." He goes, "We're going to go to a traditional Yemenis restaurant." And I was like, "All right." And he goes, "They don't have silverware, so you have to eat with your hands." It's like, man, no problem. I'm up for anything. So I go and I pull in and I drive and I get to this Yemenis restaurant and I'm sitting there and I'm waiting and waiting and waiting. And finally I get a phone call from my friend and he says, "Hey, some stuff happened. I'll explain more in a little bit. But my friend, the Yemenis guy, he's bringing some people with him." And I was like, "Oh, okay. No big deal. Whatever." Well, 10, 15 minutes goes by. My friend walks in with his Yemenis friend, and he had brought his entire extended family. There were 15 Yemenis men in full Yemenis gear. They had scimitars in their waistbands, okay? It was crazy. And then all of a sudden, and they're for like, just for show. They weren't like real swords. I wasn't scared. And then all of a sudden, they pull all the tables together and they roll out this plastic and they just start bringing out this food that I've never seen before, nor can I pronounce. And then everyone just said, they just invited me in. Like, "Come on, let's eat." And I remember thinking, I have never felt so out of place, yet so welcomed at the same time. You know, we've been talking about this idea of that we are beings that naturally love, that it's in our DNA, we love. And the problem is that we have learned behavior and we start loving the wrong things. We are in search of the good life. And so we start to love things that we think will make us happy, that will give us the good life. And so the question that I'm posing to you is that I'm saying that if you are already a being that desires to love, then let's ask the creator of us what he wants us to love. And one of the biggest things that Jesus asked us to do is to love our neighbors. And there's a story in the Bible, in Luke. It's actually in multiple Gospels, but it's in Luke. And I want to read a little bit of it to you because I think it really sums up for us what this idea of loving our neighbor looks like. Because if you remember, the Pharisees tried to trick Jesus all the time. Like, they always were trying to get to him. And this is actually, which I found this out today, this is actually the last time that Jesus goes back and forth with the Pharisees before his crucifixion. So this is one of the last times he has this back and forth. And this one is actually a lawyer who asked Jesus a question. And let me read a little bit to you. It's Luke chapter 10, verse 25, and I'm going to read a little bit down. It says, "On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he asked, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?' 'What is written in the law?' he replied. 'How do you read it?' That's what Jesus asked. He answered, 'Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind.'" We talked about that last week. "And love your neighbor as yourself." And Jesus says, "You have answered correctly," which is a really cool reply. If Jesus told me I answered correctly, I'd be pumped, right? "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, the lawyer did. So he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said this: "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. 'Look after him,' he said, 'and when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have.' Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers?" The expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." Jesus told him, "Go and do likewise." There's some really cool things that happen in this story. The man was trying to justify himself. You see, there was some rabbinic laws. Some rabbis had made these separate laws that said hating your enemies was just as important as loving your neighbor. And so this man, who had good answers and had good head knowledge, he wanted a definition of neighbor because he wanted to do as little as possible. Like, he wanted it to be a geography kind of thing, right? Like, where it's all about nearness. And when Jesus challenges him, he says, "Let me tell you a story." And when he tells the story, he brings in this Samaritan. And if you don't know, you probably do, but Samaritans were despised by the Israelite people. The Jewish people did not like them. They were like their enemy among enemies. You even notice that later on, when the man answers the question, he says, the man who had mercy. He didn't say the Samaritan because he didn't even want to say the man's name out loud. He didn't even want to give him any credit at all. But Jesus points out something extremely important for us to understand as Christians. When we're walking this world and we're trying to do all these things to be good and to live the good life and to have these things, when we are struck with empathy, when we are struck with sympathy, no matter how far away from our house it is, because geography doesn't matter, when God has asked us to love those people, they're our neighbors. They're the people who God puts in our proximity. They're the people who live next door to us. They're the people down the street. They're the people at work. They're the people that God puts you in a small group with at church. They're the people that you run into randomly that you haven't seen in 20 years from high school. They're the people that are just around you, and we are called to love them. See, we already have the nature of wanting to love, and it's super important that we do that. This is the last duel with the Pharisees, right? It's the last give and take. And Jesus' big phrase is, hey, you got to love not just God, but you have to love God's creation too. And your neighbor means everyone